And you are now live.
Okay, thank you. And thanks everybody for attending this meeting of the Forest Drive Eastport Sector Study Task Force. And in our meeting tonight, and what I would like to do is again go back to our working draft as it appears as of today in the Google Docs folder. And I want to thank people who have put in comments and done some very substantive work on this draft since the last time we met, just a little over 3 weeks ago. And before we go into that, and there are some parts of that that I really would like to bring up for the purposes of this meeting for comment. But before we do that, because we have Alderwoman Rhonda Pindell Charles and Ross Arnett on the Zoom call today, our meeting today, it goes without saying that we're going to need to extend the time to submit the report. I think it's coming along, but I just want to make a point for the purposes of this meeting that whereas in November we thought we would finish by December, we're now at the end of December. I don't know when we're going to finish, but it's going to be really soon. Let me put it that way. If I said January, I would be reminded about December. So that's the goal though. Okay, so that's the goal. And I'm going to, and there doesn't need to be a formal response tonight, but I would like, some guidance as how is this submitted. We do have some attachments that have to be put into the report. We want to submit it to City Council. We also want opportunities to, at the appropriate time, appear before the City Council for background, answer questions, so forth and so on. So let me just say that now, and I'll follow up as appropriately with the members of City Council who are with us tonight and also others. Okay. I'm going to presume for sake of this meeting, as I do for all of the meetings, that everyone has looked at this draft, okay? And except for edits that may have been put in today, some very substantive edits have been made. What I'd like to start with, since Chris, you're here tonight, you did a very substantive addition to the draft based on your comments last meeting, and your and this has to do with the section regarding a mechanism for, I'm going to say enhanced, I may not be the right word, but enhanced and clarified community participation and citizen participation over and above the use of the community benefits agreements, which this task force has looked at and incorporated into the report. So I would like to turn this over to you, Chris. I'm going to say that this process is very comprehensive. Okay, so I'd like you to give us a briefing on this. And I certainly have some questions for you tonight. Others may as well. But why don't you go ahead and give us the briefing and tell us why you wanted this level of detail in the report. Go ahead.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So as you know, we were talking about how do we leverage the community in the planning process. And, the use of a task force, I think, is a good start, but that had a dependency that the task force be appointed by an official body such as the City Council. And how do we kind of take that a step forward and do that citywide or community-wide, and particularly when you cross different wards and things of that sort. So that's why I kind of came up with this construct, which is kind of modeled. I mentioned two case studies in the paper only as background, But it's kind of modeled where other communities have had similar type problems where how do they, how do they galvanize the citizens of the community with the planning and zoning departments to kind of plan out, their city, their county, their town, their village, or what have you. And then Annapolis is kind of, not really unique, but it's broken into wards, and each ward is kind of like, its own fiefdom to a certain degree. And how do you kind of, make that work without having the alderman or alderwoman that's responsible for that ward to be, heavily engaged? And so that's why I kind of came up with a construct that, well, let's create a ward civic association, which would make up of, various neighborhood, community groups, whether they be neighborhood groups or I can't think of the term, but you have HOAs, homeowners associations, things of that sort. And then also the business groups. So I went to the city website, and I provide a copy within the document of what's been registered with the city as far as business associations and community civic groups. Obviously, some wards have quite a few. Some of them have very little. That's maybe because of how those wards are situated. I mean, if a ward is predominantly all business, it's going to actually have quite a few business associations. Conversely, if it's all homes and apartments, it's going to have mostly HOAs. But that doesn't negate the fact that you can't create additional civic associations of that sort, but that would be up to that ward leadership to kind of establish that. The key thing is that having the ward alderperson kind of chair their ward groups into a civic group, it forms a body that kind of puts it on equal footing with all the other wards. And as you can see on the diagram, it pushes, because obviously we know that the city government is kind of tries to work with all the older persons. It kind of ties that knot together very nicely, where there's a synergy between the various city offices that are necessary to work with that particular ward. And when you have more than one ward involved, then we would suggest a forming of a task force, such as the one we're, Eastport and Forest Drive task force. So that's the gist of where I was trying to pull this into more of a construct that I don't think is very difficult to do. It's very ward leadership dependent, because obviously those wards that are very aggressive, such as those that are downtown, like the Ward 1 Association is very, very strong. And even though there are other associations down there, they're probably the strongest one. And kind of shows you, what they can do with their alderperson when they try to put their foot forward. This would at least put everybody on an equal footing, I think. And probably more importantly, it allows for the wards to work together for things that are cross the city or the county. The county government has a very similar construct, or they could create a similar construct. And therefore, that would also allow for synergy between those people that are outside the Annapolis area but are affected by Annapolis. And therefore, it would allow for the task force to truly become a task force of both, county residents as well as city residents, which I think we have a few members on this task force. But this would be a construct that could be used over and over again. And once it's solidified, I think it would be a great way to leverage the citizens with the planning and zoning process, because then you would make it incumbent upon planning and zoning to always involve that wards, those wards that are affected, and to involve their community associations. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and gladly answer any questions.
Could we hear?
Yes, ma'am.
Like to get some, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rhonda. You had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for that presentation. I'll be honest, I have not taken a look at it. A couple of things strike me initially. As far as the business associations, or the number of businesses in Ward 3, we have close to 750. We have many more than any other ward. People really don't think that or know that, but we do. When I got the list from the from our business business group within planning and zoning, and they got it from the state. So we have quite a few. We don't have too many HOAs because our community was formed as a result of the end of the Civil War. So we have a lot of different homes, but they're not tied together as HOAs at all. We might have one, maybe two, that's it. So it's very different. The other thing is too, we're backed up right on the county line. And like I've always said, whatever the county does, we really have no control over. And so, and I know every ward sees itself as unique, which can be definitely a blessing because working together, I think that's a great idea. But just realizing the idiosyncrasies of every ward, I think, is extremely important, what they have to lend to it. Our Greater Incorporated was started when the parole was annexed into the city, same as Eastport, back in 1951. If it has ebbed and flowed up and down, depending on what the issues were. But at this point, we have about 484 members and 9 members on the executive leadership team. But like any organization, you know, it's a small group of people that do the bulk of the work. So thank you so much for this. I think it's definitely worth pursuing. It gives strength and power in numbers, especially when we work with those wards that are contiguous to our ward. So, and that goes for every other ward. So just to kind of put that few little tidbits out there for your listening pleasure. Thank you.
Is there some feedback?
I appreciate that. I'm surprised you have over 700 businesses.
Yeah, we do. And a lot of them are within like the Annapolis Design District, within the Gibraltar Moreland Parkway District, within the Old Solomons Island Road corridor, the Forest Drive corridor on the west end. So yeah, it's a very small, maybe one office space, but no, they're all on SDAT. So they're out there, and it's just about 750. We've got many more than anyone else. Nobody knows that. I didn't realize that myself until I asked for the list, and that's what came out of it.
But I will go to the point you made earlier. It's always a few that kind of, you know, work for the many, because that's just the nature of the beast. And I'm kind of willing to bet you that if you were to go to all 700 and say, hey, we want to form a business association to represent our community, you're only going to have probably a few, you know, half a dozen or dozen that are really willing to partake and take action. But those are the ones that, you know, they will have to represent everybody else in your ward. But the key to all this is putting it under the leadership of the alderperson, because that way you know the political as well as the sensibilities of that particular ward, along with the constituency. And I think that's what kind of makes this a rather interesting and workable construct.
Right. The other thing is too, the Annapolis Design District, I think, is celebrating 12 years. They were basically confined to the parameters of Forest Drive, Forest Drive, Chicwa, Penn, West Street, and Old Solomons. But they have now branched out, recognizing the power in numbers. So they're starting to pluck businesses over in the Moreland Parkway, Gibraltar area. So they realized that they needed to spread out a bit, and they have done that. So that's really the strongest business association that we have. The other thing is too, just for my own personal way of kind of organizing things, I've divided my ward into, I think it's about 17 regions, 12 community regions, neighborhood regions, and I think it's 5 business regions. So that way I've kind of got what I kind of call little mini mayors in every region. And they like that name because they'll let me know what's going on in their little area. And so it's good response. I've tried to kind of marshal it and try to make it easier even on myself. So that has worked out well as well. So we can definitely hone in on what you've suggested here. Like I said, I'm sorry I haven't had the opportunity to read it, but it sounds like definitely something that is definitely workable. So thank you so much.
Other
Yes,
questions?
back to you, Bill.
Yeah. Well, a number of thoughts.
I had a question that, Chris, I think you had talked earlier about the CBAs could be considered a product of these groups getting together, or this would be something that they would come together to work on. I think it's good to imagine what it is these groups are forming for.
Chris,
Yeah, no, I think the CBA is just a tool to be used in conjunction with the community groups to put into paper what their viewpoints are, along with the planning and zoning or other city agencies.
Chris, let me share with you some of my thoughts and questions about this. First of all, it's an extensive and very detailed and I think well thought out recommendation. But here are my thoughts and questions and a concern, I guess. Within the scope of our charge as the Forest Drive Eastport Sector Study Task Force, our task was to and is to review the Forest Drive Sector Study draft, to make recommendations to the City Council regarding that study, and from the standpoint of additions, omissions, issues that would be related, and I'm going to say specifically to that study. I mean, there's a boundary. So that's one consideration. Okay. As I went back and looked at my notes from the last couple of meetings on the discussion about the fundamental question was, should the task force or some entity like the task force be continued from this group? In other words, it doesn't have to be this group, but a number of people have said that in meeting over the last year as a task force, there were a couple of really good things that we learned and that we wanted to try to preserve in some sense. What are they? It was pointed out early and often that this is the first time that citizens have actually sat down with planners, agency representatives from both the city and the county to address issues within the geographic parameters of the Forest Drive corridor, all the way from Chinkopin down through Eastport and to Bay Ridge. And that was very useful. It was useful for a number of reasons. There was an exchange of information. There was a clarification of questions. I think both sides were educated, both sides meaning citizen members and agency representatives were educated on what was important to the other, how the other worked, how citizens saw certain things, how the agencies were cooperating, but nobody in certain areas, but nobody really understood that or knew that. I mean, there was a value to the discussions and that exchange. And the question was, well, how do you preserve that going forward? If you think that's a good thing, how do you preserve that? So the question then becomes, do we continue a task force? Whether it meets quarterly or whatever is a secondary process question, but the fundamental question, is this worth continuing for some reason? Okay, does it have value? From that, in my head anyway, on the question of citizen participation in decision-making regarding development, other than the things that have been around forever and available to all citizens, like testimony before the commissions, writing letters in regard to certain developments, we've had an evolution. One was the code was changed in Annapolis to require community meetings, and the county has a parallel process to that. Prior to big development, there has to be a community meeting now prior to the application as part of the code. Springing from that came the idea of the community benefits agreements as a mechanism. And I think the task force over time has essentially adopted that mechanism as a recommendation. In other words, ultimately to say to the city council, when you're looking to do something that enhances meaningful citizen participation in the process, here is a mechanism that can be used. It could be used on the Forest Drive corridor. It can be used anywhere, both in the county and in the city. Your suggestion here is much broader. I think it's good. I mean, but this is a much broader systemic structure, which would require, at least in my mind, it applies to the whole city. And to some extent, it recognizes that the county could do something like it. But in my mind, I want feedback on this, and Chris, I'd like your response on this. I think it goes, I'm trying to figure out how we fit it in the Forest Drive Sector Study Task Force report. Okay. In other words, did the Forest Drive Task Force, are we saying to City Council, this is what you should now do beyond the scope of our purview to look at the whole city? And maybe that's what you want to say. Or recognize that we have, in this task force, started to look at an evolution of different kinds of mechanisms. And this is kind of a third tier. So if you think about the continuing task force meeting as tier 1, very basic. Tier 2 is a use of a community benefit agreement process. And tier 3 is this more comprehensive, more all-encompassing structure, because you're talking about older people not only being willing to do this, but essentially under the structure they're mandated to do it. And I would say that if you asked every single, I may be wrong about this, but if you asked every single member of the city council as to whether they're in touch with their civic associations, their business groups, so that they have some structure as to how they get feedback for community action, if you will, or input, they'll say yes. They're all different. They operate differently. They all have their own ups and downs, idiosyncrasies. And sometimes that's what all these people fight about anyway. But, it's there. And so what I'm really trying to say, and I know I'm blabbering here, but I'm trying to say that is this an addendum? In other words, is this a way for this task force to say, hey, look at a progression of community input, and here's what other places have done, and here's some ideas that you can move toward in the future. That's really what I'm saying, and style it in the report that way. So having blabbered on now for 5 minutes, let me open that up, Chris, for your response and anybody else.
So Bill, the way I looked at the task force, the way we're structured right now, is that once we turn in a final report and it's accepted by the city council, there is no legitimacy for us to continue without some kind of rationale. And I understand the rationale that there's still a lot of work to be done in the fulfillment of these recommendations. I was trying to offer a means to an end for the city council to adopt a governance structure that was equitable among all the wards and could expand or contract as necessary based upon various
right. No, I
planning
understand.
and zoning opportunities.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And I think so. This will provide longevity for the task force if they are willing to accept this governance. Even though you say that the wards are in touch with their different community groups, I'm sure they are, but how many of those are formalized along with planning and zoning, so that every development process that comes through planning and zoning that affects a ward automatically would involve that civic association? I don't think that happens today. We are the first one with the task force. And that, again, is the rationale for this construct, is it would force that mechanism to become formalized between the ward community membership and planning and zoning with regards to any planning and zoning item that action that came up affecting that ward. And it would be an equitable mechanism across the city as well as in working with the county. So that was the rationale for kind of pushing it along that way.
I get that. I mean, I really do understand that. And I think that's good. Okay. I mean, I'll just tell you, I think that's a good direction. On the question of whether this task force relative to issues related to the Forest Drive corridor continues once we're finished, that's up to City Council. We could say to City Council, look,
Correct.
Here are some things we learned about the process. Here is our experience. If you all think this is worth preserving in any way, here are some ideas as to how to do it. And then it's up to them. I mean, they can say, thank you very much.
Totally agree.
Have a nice day. We'll get back to you. You know, or with the planners and with us and others, they could say, well, here's what we want to keep talking about. Here's a mechanism we want to keep doing. And I get it. I think this construct is visionary. This is how you do it for the whole city. Is that right, Chris? Am I reading that right or not? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay.
Along with the use of the CBAs as the mechanism for solidifying the relationship between planning and zoning, the community group, and the developer.
Okay. Can we hear from some of the planners in the group, some of the city and county representatives on this? Any thoughts at all about this process?
I mean, I think it fits. I mean, obviously the task force is maybe a little different than what City Council would envision, but I think that's okay. And I think the point is to do planning better. And if this is something the group thinks could help the city do planning better, and it seems like a pretty good idea to me because it ensures representation from everyone, which is something we struggle a lot with, then I think it has a valuable place in the report.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else want to go ahead? Rhonda.
Yeah, I just piggybacking on that visionary term, and also what Sally said about we want to do planning better. And as all of you know, and I've talked about it before, in Ward 3, when any relatively significant development, and Sally knows, Dr. Nash knows, we have a protocol that we follow, and it works out extremely well, where the initial developer goes to Dr. Nash office, talks to them, then comes to me, and then Mr. Harris and I discuss it, and then we take it to the Greater Parole Community Association, and from there the executive leadership team, and then to the community, and back and forth until it's a product that we're satisfied with. And we found it works extremely well. And that was kind of it's not a CBA technically, but also within that structure is the Greater Parole Community Association, which is the largest one that we have, resident one that we have in the ward. will work with the developer and say, okay, you're moving into our community. What can we expect out of you as far as a benefit, a quality of life, that sort of thing. I don't get involved in those negotiations at all. That is not my role, but they will do that. And it has worked out well. Some things are smaller, some are larger. And Dr. Nash has heard me say this many times over the years, we've gotten things in Ward 3 that we didn't want, and things we wanted we couldn't get. And so it was my intent to make sure that we got some things we wanted, and the things we didn't want, we didn't get. And so, and I think that's somewhat visionary, but I had to find a way as the older person to have some structure within this process. And nobody should hear my voice all the time. They needed to hear what the residents were interested in, and that sort of thing. And that's why the association has ebbed and flowed, but it has become pretty solid over the past few years. And so I like this idea. I'm not saying, and I'm sure Alderman Arnett will agree, I'm not saying every alder person is going to buy into this, but I think it's certainly worth an addendum. Whether you take it or not as the alder person, that's your choice. But I think we need to start looking beyond what we've been doing. And Dr. Nash, I do believe, has brought on a vision within her department that we all, I think, can rally around. I've been very satisfied with what I see. And so it's been successful for us. And I think we need to step out a little bit more than what we have in the past. Like I said, if it doesn't fly, then it doesn't fly with some, but with some others, then it may. And eventually, those I think will catch on. And so I'm willing to try. I'm one of those persons. I'm willing to try anything. If it doesn't work, and we throw it in the trash can and we move on to something else. I'm not shamed at all. So, but that's kind of my thought with all of this.
Yeah, Alderman Ross Arnett.
Thank you. I'll start off with a blanket statement that I made to the city manager within the last couple of weeks, which is I think that in many ways we've put the Department of Planning and Zoning in a very untenable position, and we need to do some things to rectify that. There are some nascent things that I've seen going very well. I sat in on the planning commission meeting on the 101, 103 Annapolis Road, that issue. What I saw happen there, I think, is leading to what for me is a very good outcome. And it was an outcome where there was some registering from the community about concern, happened to be for 2 big oak trees. But what developed, and of course, some of this depends upon who the architect is, was what seems like a very good dialogue between the architect for the developer and the city staff, and a back and forth negotiation that it was give a little, get a little kind of thing. We probably can't save both trees, but maybe we can save one, and in the process come up with some better design elements. Now, Leo Wilson, who's the architect, said it himself at the hearing, until just a few weeks ago, they didn't even know the trees were an issue. And that may well have been the same position the planning staff were in, but it did become an issue. And there was a process that was embarked upon, which I call opening up the doors, opening up the process, and shining some light on it. And I think that is going to work out pretty well. In Ward 8, Jackie Wells and I have been having some discussions with Dr. Nash and her staff about improvements to the legislation. And I think those have been very productive. And we had another meeting today of the subgroup of the Architecture and Zoning Committee, where I think we're making some movement forward with some things that we can come back to planning and zoning and say, huh, what do you think of this fix? And that's been a good give and take. But again, it's kind of opened up the doors to the process. Um, I think when you have uh, processes that are not open, you just beg for suspicion and things. So the recent mitigation process, I think, has been one of those things that I don't know that we're going to come up with a different set of mitigations, but I do think we could have a different process, a more open process. So I'm working on some legislation that I will be drafting and bringing forward to share with everybody soon. But I think the mitigation process needs to be an open process. I think it needs to be one where the discussion, the dialogue, I think between the applicant and the community are held in a forum which in my view, and this is very nascent, so don't quote me on this, but would be overseen by the planning and zoning staff, would be overseen possibly by the Office of Law. But that kind of negotiation and trade-off could occur in the open on Zoom, where the give and take, and lots of times when you get into discussing the give and take, like Jackie and I have gotten when we've been discussing with Sally and Tom and Kevin, Cynthia, Jackie, Rouse, you find out, oh, what you thought could be an easy solution doesn't work because of other aspects of the code or other kinds of considerations. But still, having that open forum, I think, is something that is really good. I think that the community benefit agreements, however that eventuates, is a logical outgrowth of the pre-application meeting. I think there's all kinds of ways that that can get hung up or get sticky, or, is this legally binding? All of those sorts of things. But I find that whenever you get people talking to each other, and not in a courtroom like setting where it's clearly very adversarial, but really just talking to each other, you find out that these things are very resolvable. And hard held positions, I'm only going to do this, I'm not taking anything else, can melt away to, oh, I see your point. And so maybe if we do this, then you can do that kind of thing. So if and I'm sorry, I went off and had some dinner, but I assume we're somewhere around page 8 in the current draft, which is looking at the structural setup that shows the task force in that structural arrangement. Maybe I'm behind or ahead, I don't know. But if we're talking about something like the task force being an ongoing entity, I do see value in that. I do see some sorting out. I think we're going to have to sort out what is the role of the planning commission vis-a-vis a task force like structure that sort of meets with the various associations in the ward and with the planning staff. And that will all have to be sorted out. The whole land use, who's doing what. One of the things we were talking about today in our meeting was the infamous 3250 rule in Eastport, and the 3250 rule going to the planning commission, which when it gets to the planning commission, they say, well, what do you want us to do with this kind of thing? We have no standards, we have no criteria, there's no guidelines. You just want us to spitball back an answer, and really probably would be more appropriate, if it's going to go anywhere, go to the Board of Appeals, where is it in the rules? Is it in the code? Yes or no? If it's in the code, was the code followed? Yes or no? Much more of a rigorous structural kind of thing. But clearly, we have to do something. I won't speak for any other ward but mine, but I can say that there is a very high level of anxiety and flat out dissatisfaction And that's not good for me. It's not good for the city. It's not good for the staff. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for the developers. Look how long we've been in process with the Eastport Shopping Center, and we're not done yet. And I think that we can't have project after project going through that kind of gauntlet. We tried the mediation with the Eastport Shopping Center, and that addressed the bulk, but it didn't get at some of these other things. And so I think if we have a more open, prescribed process from the get-go that identifies. So one of the things that I have suggested that the council has been remiss in, and when I said it in a meeting that Dr. Nash was at, I think I saw her perk up, but I think the council itself needs to issue a policy checklist. What are the things that we want considered for canopy, tree canopy, stormwater management? We got into that a little bit with the percent of the rainwater that needs to be handled, and on down the line, critical area, heights, all of those things that we work on a checklist, which I suspect will be about as much effort as putting together a comp plan, but still the council has in a notion a set of policies that we think we have given in the form of code to be followed, but it isn't enumerated anywhere and it isn't even checked out amongst ourselves. So you go into a project and you're doing a project in Ward 8 and there's a gotcha list there. You do a project in Ward 1, there's a gotcha list there. And you do a project in Ward 3 and there's another list. That doesn't help anybody, and it certainly has got to be giving the staff nightmares and the residents. So I think there's a number of things we need to do in vanguard kinds of operations that change the way we do business. This task force, and particularly when it was much bigger group of people that was bringing in people from the county and the state as well as the city. And I think one of the revelations for me, and I will shut up here pretty quickly, but one of the revelations for me was hearing the staff to staff kinds of conversations and yeah, we already do that. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, we do that too. Oh, well, that's a good idea. And then there was some cross-pollination. I think I heard the traffic people from the county say that they would like to do it more like the way the city does it. Well, that's a good thing. And that is, again, part of what this task force did. It brought in that whole cross-section from top to bottom along a corridor and started people having conversations. And I think that that is the best thing we can do for ourselves. Give people the opportunity to be heard and meaningfully heard. And even if things don't go their way, they'll say, well, at least there's a mechanism where I can be heard, and maybe the next time the decision will be more compatible with what I think should be done. So long
Well,
rambling.
Alderman, I'm going to cut you off because we're going to.
I know, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I just had to spew. Just think of that as 5 meetings that I missed.
That's right. Okay, you're caught up and you've got 20% credit for the next meeting. Okay, so okay, I want to come back to Chris's work and his which dovetails exactly with what you've been saying. Thank you and others. So what I'm hearing, and again, perception check. What I'm hearing, Chris, is there's a consensus that this is going to be in the report. Do you have any? I just want to say one thing. One thing that you did very well here is you dealt with a mechanism when there is a city and county involvement in a particular project. So as we read this, I was struck with the fact that you've articulated a mechanism as to how to deal with that. Okay, and I think that's a good thing. So there seems to be a consensus that we're going to include this in. Chris, are there other edits or changes that you would, I'm not putting you on the spot, but is there anything that is yet to be said that you're thinking about in this edit?
No, Bill, I pretty much have gotten it where I think we want to have it at. I
Okay.
do want to give Lily a shout out because she kind of made me think out a little bit out of the box in order to get the county in. And going to Mr. Alderman Arnett's point, the one case study I mentioned, the Odenton Town Center, that is exactly what the citizens did. They instead of constricting themselves to what is allowable under law, they said, this is what we want as a community, and they created their own standards for developers to comply with. And I think that's very forward looking, and I would like to see us try to do the same thing with our planning and zoning through our comprehensive plans.
Okay. Thank you for your work on this, Chris. I really appreciate it. Alderwoman Pindell Charles, yes.
One quick thing. I'm glad you said that, Chris, because right now we've had a presentation by Dr. Nash in our office, and I gave them a 13-page document. I know Eric read it, and we put in there what we wanted and what we didn't want. So I'm glad you said that, because I mean, I hadn't really thought about it totally thoroughly, but when I got rolling, I really got rolling. So we're at that juncture right now, and it's revolutionary, I must say. So just thank you for that. And I'm glad you did put the county part in there. One thing I want to mention too, if out of about close to 750 businesses in Ward 3, I can count on two hands, not even two, how many non-fast food restaurants I have. There are very, very few sit down and eat restaurants that we have in Ward 3. So, but anyway, thank you all for that. Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Let me
Hey,
switch
ma'am, if
gears.
you need to charge, we're right behind you.
Let me switch gears to Lily. Did I hear you say you had some additional additions you wanted to put, edits into the draft at this point?
I added some things. So I guess everybody, a couple things. I worked with Claire. We took the recommendation for greenway environmental enhancement areas and complete streets policy. Those they go together in a lot of ways, but they are separate concepts. So we broke them into two separate recommendations. And I spoke with Ramon and Brian and found out that the county is pretty far along in adopting complete street policy. And also they've just recently adopted design guidelines that incorporate the complete streets philosophy. So our recommendation is going to be that we look at the current county policy and details and incorporate that in recommendations for Forest Drive sector.
Are those additional, I'm sorry to interrupt, are those additional edits you're saying you still need to make?
I already put them in.
Okay, so
they're in, and the only other, then I was going to expand a little bit on the recommendation for the, basically the GIS specialists at the county's school transportation board. I just put a little bit of the background into that. That's something Rhonda had sent you some information on. And so I just kind of wrote a little bit more into that recommendation. And then there were 3 recommendations that came out of a kind of an overall transit recommendation, I guess, Forest Drive sector study had made. And I really just kind of flipped that and I went to the specific recommendation and then just said, this is part of a transit strategy that the Forest Drive sector study is recommending. And the reason I did that was because they really are focusing on very different issues, and we might want to combine them in different areas, different action areas. So I didn't want to keep this broad terminology as the thing that people remembered. So I just really just flipped the order and went specific to general. And those are all those edits are in right now. The only thing I have left, and when I finish it, I will send it out to everybody as well as post it, was just kind of summarizing. Ramon and Brian gave me great feedback on the different mechanisms the county is using for funding their CIP program, and as well as the different planning documents that feed into the program. And I'm just trying to finish wrapping that up. I have one or two more questions for them, but it sounds like a lot. It's really not. It's going to be maybe half a page with some diagrams. So it won't be a lot to read once I put all the pieces together.
Great, thank you. And let me just ask, because I know in the last couple of conversations, and you and Claire have worked together on this, there was some question as to whether Claire, remember whether we had captured the recommendations that came out of the work groups. Comprehensive. Are you and Lily satisfied now that we have captured those?
So with one additional edit that I just made tonight, yes, they are.
Okay.
I separated the one that Lily and I worked on into two pieces, because when we were working outside of the draft and I didn't necessarily read everything in context with what was already there. So if people are going to accept what I put in tonight, then I'm satisfied. Everything that we worked on in our work group is now in.
Good. Okay, in keeping with, Alderwoman, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Yeah, Lily, can you circulate the latest draft of everything that you've done either today, tomorrow, whenever you feel comfortable, so I can kind of take a look at it in its pretty much final form? That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, in keeping with my Christmas promise to end this meeting within an hour, we have, from the time we started, we have 6 more minutes. Is there an issue we haven't talked about that needs to be discussed or at least brought up tonight? We're going to continue to work off of this draft. I'm not going to change the name of the draft or the location of the draft so that everybody can see it in real time as it's being edited, commented on, and but it's really getting fleshed out. And I really thank people for the work they're doing on this. If you read this thing, it's really starting to come together. And that was the whole point. And give people in real time the opportunity to participate, contribute, comment, criticize, whatever. Any new issues? Burning questions? Things you can't wait to talk about again until next month? Great.
Bill, do you want me to try and set up another city's sponsored Zoom meeting for January? Or
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. So, whenever you get some dates available, let me know. Okay. We'll set that up. With that, thank you very much, folks. Have a happy and safe holiday. Get some rest. And Patrick, next time, let us know if it's your cat speaking or you, okay? All right. All right, thank you.
Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
Julie.
Merry Christmas.